and support us.
Frances Neal, Helen Morrissey, thank you both indeed very much for joining us in the studio. It was time for the Commons to debate defence today. It followed a report from last month deeply critical of the armed forces' readiness for war and expressions of disappointment, including from two ministers, that the recent budget didn't allocate more money to defence. Today, Conservative Danny Kruger spoke of a national security crisis, and Labour's Kevin Jones that the Ministry of Defence needed a radical revolution in the way it employs people. Dame Meg Hillier, chairwoman of the Public Accounts Committee, on the other hand, put much of the blame on the forces' mismanagement of their own procurement projects. So have the cries of alarm across Europe about a possible war with Russia changed the way that the public view this issue? Polling by the British Foreign Policy Group suggests that 59% support raising defence spending and 78% strongly support NATO. But of course, that's asking about those specific issues. Other surveys suggest that the British public overestimates by a factor of 4 the proportion of government spending that actually goes on the military. And when you ask people to choose 3 priority areas, only 20% pick defence, which is the same for crime, but behind immigration on 37%, health on 45%, and of course the economy, which is a top 3 issue for 53% of people. Well, to explore that now, we're joined by Scarlett Maguire at Pollsters JL Partners. Scarlett, look, you've looked at the electoral figures on this, the opinion research. This ought to be an issue that plays well for the Conservatives, shouldn't it?
I mean, yes, traditionally speaking, you would think that the Conservatives would be doing better for defence. And actually, relatively speaking, they are doing, but this is only relative to their performance elsewhere. So the public do think that the Conservatives would handle defence sort of marginally better than they think the Labour Party would. Don't know actually still wins out there. However, you know, in terms of that, having a leader of the Labour Party on an issue, that's fine. It's definitely better than they're doing on things like immigration, the economy and the health service. But more members of the public than not still think that the government is handling defence badly. And actually, I think that initial statistic that you mentioned is quite an interesting one. We did that polling for the British Foreign Policy Group. And even though, you know, close to 60% of Britons say that they would like to increase the defence spending to 2.5%, only 25% say they would like that to happen immediately. And that's where you run into the political problems of trying to do such a thing now.
And in terms of how this works across the electorate, presumably there are certain cohorts, younger people, women, who are not as convinced about the value of defence spending.
That's absolutely right. There are some really interesting splits when you go into that. You're right. Younger people, much less likely to be convinced. So to give you a sort of idea of that, I think it's sort of about 1 in 10 sort of under 25s would like to see defence spending increased immediately. That goes up to like 40% of over 66s. So there's a big difference there in how people see the issue. Sorry. Sorry, excuse me. There's also really, oh my goodness, there's a really big difference between how men and women see it as well, with significantly more men supporting the idea of defence spending and more interest in it. And there's also a party political split too, so that Conservative voters are much more likely to want to see increases to the defence budget than Labour voters.
Scarlett, thank you very much. Well, with us now to discuss this